The Omnis Ray was the greatest ship ever built by the Aurelian Concord, a proud and ancient alliance of star-faring civilizations known for their unmatched technology and long history of victory in the galaxy. And now, this ship had one goal: enter the mysterious dark anomaly near the edge of the Tarsus system and stop it before it swallowed more stars. Scientists believed it was some kind of cosmic storm, a break in space-time itself, and the Concord believed their strongest ship, equipped with the best shielding weapons and artificial minds, would easily overcome it. The ship moved forward, like a silver blade through space, its engines humming with quiet confidence, its hull lined with golden light, and its crew, made up of the finest minds of a dozen worlds, monitored everything with perfect calm. But as Omnis Ray crossed the outer layer of the anomaly, something strange began to happen. The sensors flickered, power fluctuated, and the hull vibrated not from force, but from something deeper, like space itself was trying to whisper or push back. The commander gave the order to increase shield strength, but instead the energy drained faster. Weapons wouldn't lock, navigation spun in circles, and the artificial minds began speaking in broken phrases that made no sense. One by one, systems shut down, not as if damaged, but as if they were forgotten, like they had never existed at all. Within minutes, the mighty Omnis Ray, the shield of the Concord, drifted silently in the dark, powerless, blind, and voiceless. Across the galaxy, when the emergency signal returned with no message except the final system log, "Reality breach, we cannot fight it," the Galactic Assembly fell into shock. The Concord, who had never known defeat, now stared at the first warning of something beyond their control. Panic moved through their worlds. Leaders called emergency meetings, scientists demanded time, generals asked for new weapons, and many simply refused to believe that the ship had failed at all. But in the vast chamber of the assembly, among floating light chairs and crystalline walls, one voice calmly asked for permission to speak. She was not from any high-ranking race of the Concord. She was not even part of the old alliances. She was human. Her name was Captain Mira Holt, and she stood with a simple black coat, a short file in her hand, and a strange drawing projected behind her. An outline of a ship with a large mechanical joint on its side, labeled Project Elbow of Fate. At first, there was silence, then laughter, then disbelief. What was this odd machine? What kind of strange name was that? Why should a young race like humanity be allowed to try what the Concord's best had failed? Mira did not raise her voice. She only said, "The anomaly is not breaking our ships. It is testing their purpose. We are fighting the wrong fight." Some members of the assembly dismissed her. Others watched with quiet interest. One, a curious being of living crystal named Sultran of the High Mind, asked, "Then what would you do, human?" Mira stepped forward, her voice steady. "Give me one ship, I will not fight the storm. I will move with it." And before anyone could vote, the assembly leader said, "Let her try. We have already lost our strongest. Perhaps our smallest has the answer." And so Mira was given an old explorer ship, forgotten in a dusty dock, long past its prime. Alone, she walked through the quiet halls of the vessel, touching its walls, remembering old Earth designs and smiling at the shape of the joint she would install. She called it the Elbow of Fate, not because it was strong, but because it could bend, it could turn, and it could move with intention, just like the old human martial forms taught in hidden mountain schools on Earth. Her engineers, mostly borrowed, volunteers and curious observers, watched as she shaped the ship into something strange, part machine, part gesture. She added joints, rotating arms, and balance centers, not for weapons, but for movement. She painted old patterns along the frame, spirals, arcs, and symbols that made no sense to the Concord minds. Yet something about it felt alive. As she Prepared to launch, reporters and watchers gathered, some out of mockery, others with quiet hope. Mira looked at the stars once, then entered the pilot seat, her hands on the control rings, and whispered, "Let's try a different question." The ship, now named Momentum's Edge, lifted from the dock and moved toward the same dark field that had swallowed the Omnis Ray. The journey was silent, no speeches, no music, just the soft hum of the reworked engine and the steady breath of a human who believed that the answer was not in force, but in flow. As the ship crossed the edge of the anomaly, the energy ripples came again, twisting like a great ocean wave. But this time, instead of resisting, Mira turned with it, letting the ship roll, twist and spin, not as an error, but as a dance. The Concorde sensors watching from far away showed no collapse. The ship remained whole. It was not sinking. It was gliding. And deep in the assembly chamber, those who had laughed now leaned forward, eyes wide, watching the old Earth technology, guided by one human pilot, doing what their strongest ship could not. Mira whispered again, "It's not about strength. It's about the right move at the right time." And as the ship vanished deeper into the heart of the anomaly, the screens turned to static. The silence returned, but this time it did not bring fear. It brought a question that no one could forget. What is the elbow of fate really meant to do? The moment Mira Holt's ship disappeared into the anomaly, the Galactic Assembly was thrown into confusion again. Half of them expected her to vanish like the Omnis Ray, while others waited in silence, unsure what to feel, but no signal came. No sound, only a strange, steady vibration detected on deep space sensors. Not noise, but rhythm, like the pulse of a living storm. Mira's strange blueprint, marked Project Elbow of Fate, was now studied by engineers from every corner of the Concorde, yet none of them could explain it fully, because it wasn't based on power or equations they understood, but on something else, movement, balance, timing, and something Mira had called intent through form, a concept that made no sense to minds built around logic and precision. As days passed, Mira's recorded speech was replayed again and again. "I will not fight the storm. I will move with it." And slowly, curiosity replaced laughter. The Assembly granted permission for a deeper study of human ideas, and Earth was asked to provide technical and cultural insight, which led to something even stranger, a group of retired martial artists. Dancers and movement theorists arriving at the Concorde science halls, speaking not of engines or weapons, but of motion signatures, spatial empathy, and how the elbow, in many human traditions, was not just a joint, but a pivot, a way to redirect energy. This puzzled many alien scientists, but one by one, they started watching old Earth videos of spiral fighting forms, gymnastic rolls, and pressure point moves, trying to understand what this had to do with a ship. Back at the old construction dock where Mira had rebuilt her vessel, a team was assigned to build a second prototype based on her plans, though no one was fully sure how to recreate the strange design choices she had made by feel rather than formula. Her first design had included a rotating arm fitted with a large elbow joint, not meant to strike, but to angle the ship's intent, a confusing phrase that the engineers simply accepted and tried to model. They used human alloy patterns, flexible gyroscopic rings, and newly designed inertia thrusters that worked in curves instead of straight lines. The ship began to take shape, not as a weapon, but as a dancer in space. It had no forward guns, only echo sensors, motion absorbers, and a neural interface designed for instinctive movement. Mira had left instructions before entering the anomaly, short and clear. "Trust the body, it knows the way." Meanwhile, in a quiet control room far from the Assembly's main chamber, a communication officer named Relka of the Tall Eyes monitored the deep-range scan logs when she noticed something odd. The steady pulse that had been humming for days suddenly changed. like a skipped heartbeat or a step in a dance that had turned. She enhanced the data and gasped. Not only was the pulse still alive, but it was forming a pattern, a spiral wave that was spreading outward slowly, touching the edge of the storm like fingers brushing fabric. She rushed to report it, and the signal was played before the assembly. The pattern didn't match any known code, but it repeated in clear loops, gentle, deliberate, and familiar to one of the human visitors, a soft-spoken movement expert named Dr. Ellis Grant, who stood and said, "That's a kata, a sequence of moves. She's alive, and she's communicating through motion." The room fell silent, and in that moment, the conquered finally began to understand that they were not facing a force that could be broken, but a language that had to be answered. Mira wasn't resisting the anomaly. She was speaking to it. The assembly approved full cooperation with Earth's motion specialists, and the second prototype was named Balance Edge, designed not to attack or defend, but to listen, learn, and move with the storm's rhythm. Across the stars, word spread that a human was still inside the impossible storm, dancing with the chaos and teaching it to remember. Young pilots began studying Earth movements. Alien thinkers wrote about intent-based motion theory, and people who had never cared about humans before now began to see them not as weak or wild, but as strange holders of a forgotten way, one where the elbow mattered more than the fist, where a turn meant more than a strike. Back inside the anomaly, Mira's ship floated gently through waves of bending light and deep pressure currents. She could feel the motion around her, like a hand on her back, guiding her to move or pause, and she followed with small tilts, quick shifts, careful spirals. She had stopped trying to understand it with words. Now she felt it in her bones. Her hands moved the control rings like they were extensions of her arms, each gesture mirrored by the ship. Sometimes she thought she heard something inside the storm, not a voice, but a question, quiet and slow, waiting for an answer only she could give. Her ship trembled once more, and a sudden twist of space nearly broke her rhythm, but she responded with a slow pivot and an elbow sweep, the same move she had learned in an old dojo on Earth when she was still young, and the pressure faded. The storm respected the move, not because it was powerful, but because it was right. Mira opened a channel, tried to send a signal back to the assembly, but the storm swallowed the transmission. Still, she hoped they would know she was alive. Her supplies were low, her ship's systems strained, but she felt close to something hidden at the center, something waiting to be seen. In her last message, partially recorded before the signal faded, she said, "I need one more piece, a second elbow. With symmetry, I can reach the core." The message reached the edge of the anomaly, broken and distorted, but enough to send the assembly into motion. A volunteer scientist named Professor Kale from the crystalline Seldari race stepped forward and offered a prototype balance limb, a relic of old failed gravity experiments, saying, "We did not understand it before, but she does. Let her complete the movement." A small drone ship was prepared, fitted with the new elbow design, and launched toward the storm with quiet hope. No weapons, no commands, only a delivery of a strange piece of human-inspired technology into a force that no one could yet define. As the drone crossed into the anomaly, all sensors watched closely, holding their collective breath. For the first time, hope did not ride on strength, firepower, or ancient pride. It rode on a turning joint, a curve of motion, and the belief that sometimes the right path was not straight, but spiraled. The world waited in silence, wondering if the elbow of fate would be enough to change what even their strongest ship could not. Inside the heart of the storm, Mira Holt, floated in her ship, Momentum's Edge, surrounded by shifting waves of light, folding gravity, and echoes of energy that made no sense to any normal mind. But she no longer tried to make sense of it through math or logic. Instead, she watched, listened, and moved, and somehow the storm moved with her, like a partner in a strange and silent dance. Her ship's control rings glowed under her fingers as she guided it with slow arcs and turns, using her arms, her shoulders, even the weight of her breath to shift direction in ways that matched the pulsing rhythm around her. She had long stopped using her voice, knowing the storm did not respond to sound, only to motion and feeling. The old elbow joint she had installed remained her main tool, rotating gently as the ship angled and twisted in paths that looked random, but were not. They were precise, learned from years of practicing martial forms where the body became the message. But now, something had changed. The rhythm of the storm had grown stronger, deeper, like a pulse rising before a leap. The tendrils of dark energy curling around her ship no longer felt like danger, they felt like tests. Each ripple in space was a question. Do you understand? Are you ready? Mira could feel it pressing inward, not to crush her, but to challenge her. She knew the storm wanted something, maybe even needed something, but it wasn't asking for a fight. It was asking for an answer only movement could give. Then her ship trembled, not from damage but from imbalance. One elbow was not enough anymore. She needed a second to complete the gesture. She sent a signal, half-recorded, barely readable, asking for a matching joint, and after what felt like days of silence, a blip appeared on her scanner. A drone was approaching, slow and steady, carrying the part she had asked for. Her breath caught in her throat. They had heard her. The Concorde had answered. As the drone crossed into the storm, it began to spin, almost pulled into chaos. But Mira adjusted her ship's movement, pulling alongside it with a slow roll, catching it in the crook of her maneuver arm, like a dancer catching a partner. The drone clicked into place, and with quick effort, Mira used the auto-repair tools to attach the second elbow to the other side of the ship. Once connected, something clicked, not just in the metal, but in the air, in the pressure, in the rhythm of the storm itself. It reacted, like a breath held too long finally let go. The space around her shimmered with new patterns. Mira pulled the ship into a wide arc, the two elbows turning at once, shifting the vessel's direction with perfect symmetry, and the storm answered. The tendrils did not attack, they opened. Space itself folded like a curtain being drawn back, and a path appeared, not straight but spiraled, leading deeper into the center of the anomaly. Mira followed, guiding Momentum's Edge through tight turns and careful rolls, each one matched by a new pulse from the storm, as if it was welcoming her now, not testing her. The ship flowed through tunnels of light and gravity folds that twisted and reformed with each step she took, and she realized this wasn't random. The storm was reacting to her movements, shaping itself based on her form, her timing, her intention. It was like a mirror, not of her image, but of her purpose. Deeper and deeper she moved, and the space around her began to change. The wild energy grew calm, the lights grew softer, warmer, the gravity pulses felt like music with no sound, and in the distance, something massive waited. She couldn't see it yet, but she could feel it, the center, the heart of the anomaly, the source of everything that had destroyed the Omnis Ray and frightened the entire Concorde. But now, she didn't feel fear, she felt focus. The storm wanted her to reach it, but only if she came in balance, with motion that was not forced, not selfish, but true. A sudden shift in the current sent the ship spinning. Mira responded instantly, pulling the two elbows in and then sweeping them out again, guiding the vessel into a full circle motion, catching the pull and redirecting it like a martial throw. The space folded and reopened, and suddenly she was there. The core of the anomaly stood before her, not a thing of fire or destruction, but a massive sphere of light and dark, turning slowly like a living thought. Around it, fragments of ancient metal floated, pieces of old machines, languages etched into their surface, symbols that Mira did not recognize, but somehow understood. This was no accident, no natural storm. This was built, a creation, a vault. Mira stared, awe in her eyes, as the realization hit her. The storm was a door, and she had danced the key into the lock. The ship slowed. She stood in the control chamber, raised her arms, and guided the elbows into one final move. A smooth arc, then a balanced twist, then a soft, open-hand motion through the center of the storm's rhythm. Her body knew the move. Her ship followed it. The storm paused, then reacted. The sphere pulsed once, then again. Then it began to open, not with sound or heat, but with light peeling back like petals. Inside was a space untouched by time, filled with the memory of a race long gone, the prime sentience. Their thoughts remained in the folds of space, written not in words, but in form, in pattern, in motion. Mira floated her ship closer. There were no voices, but she understood. This vault had waited for someone who could move, not with violence, but with grace. Someone who could speak without sound, someone who knew that the elbow wasn't just a tool of force, but of turning, of balance, of redirection. She had passed the test. Mira touched the control ring one last time, and the vault released a stream of information, blueprints, ideas, maps of energy forms and stabilizers, ways to heal the damage left by storms like this one. She saved the data, her hands shaking, then turned her ship slowly to face the path home. As she moved, the storm unfolded behind her, letting her go. The anomaly was no longer a threat. It was a gate, and Mira Holt, a human with an old martial form and a strange ship, had been the only one who knew how to open it. The dance was complete, and now the galaxy would remember the lesson. When strength failed, balance remained, and the elbow of fate had made the difference. Mira Holt's ship drifted slowly back through the storm's curved path. The vault behind her now open and still glowing with quiet light, yet even as she moved away, she could feel something was following. Not a thing, but a presence. Like the storm's memory itself was watching her, curious and cautious, waiting to see what she would do next, and Mira didn't blame it. For the knowledge she now carried wasn't just ancient, it was alive, and she could sense its weight pressing gently against her mind like a whisper that had no words, but many meanings. The data she had received from the vault pulsed with patterns and energy waves that made no sense to machines, but flowed like motion through her thoughts, as if they were not meant to be read, but remembered, not translated but performed, and as her ship passed through the last ring of folding space, she knew the real challenge was just beginning, because what she had found wasn't a weapon or a power source. It was a message, and the galaxy wasn't ready for it yet. On the other side of the anomaly, the waiting Concord ships picked up her signal, and the storm that had once swallowed everything without a trace now gently opened to let her through, causing a wave of stunned silence among the fleet as they watched the momentum's edge return, with no damage, no smoke, only light trailing from its path like ribbons of understanding. And when Mira landed, her first words were quiet and strange. "It listens when you mean it." Many did not understand her, but the movement scientists, the martial thinkers, and a few old war veterans looked at each other with quiet recognition. They had felt something too, in their own way. The vault's data was stored in a sealed archive, but Mira knew it could not be understood through study alone, so she asked to train others, not in piloting or science, but in motion, form, rhythm, and the kind of control that came not from strength, but from clarity of thought and body. Some called it foolish, but others came, drawn by the mystery, and the first of them to understand even a fraction of the vault's knowledge was a young diplomat named Karen Voss, who had once trained in human movement arts out of curiosity, but now saw them in a new light. As Mira taught the sequence of forms she had used to unlock the vault, strange things began to happen. Machines nearby picked up soft pulses of energy that echoed the same spiral pattern the storm had shown. And even far from the anomaly, gravitational fields began to mimic those shapes, as if the very space around them was listening to the motions made by the body. Some engineers dismissed it as coincidence, but others began to study it deeply, and they realized the knowledge was not just data, it was resonance, a kind of echo that only responded to specific movements done with true intent, not practice. Not repetition, but real, purposeful motion. Mira called it the echo of intent, and soon her quiet sessions grew in number as different species came to see what their own bodies could learn when motion met meaning. Across the Concorde, old doubts about humans began to fade, replaced by cautious wonder, and ships once built for speed or firepower were now being tested for flexibility, for flow, for balance, with some even experimenting with elbow rotation. Units that responded not to code, but to neural intent. But even as this new idea began to spread, something else was happening. Deep in the network of the vault's memory, a pattern had started to move on its own, a repeating pulse that no one had triggered but which Mira felt in her dreams, like a call waiting to be answered. She knew the vault wasn't just sharing knowledge. It was waking up, and whatever had created it long ago had left more than blueprints behind. Late one night, she stood alone in the training hall, repeating the same spiral move she had done, at the heart of the storm, and when she completed it, a shadow of energy appeared in the air, just for a second, a shape not quite real, not quite solid, but present, like a memory trying to become form. It vanished, but the feeling stayed, and Mira understood. The vault had stored echoes of the beings who built it, not just their knowledge, but their motions, their thoughts, their essence. And now that she had moved the right way, one of them had tried to answer. She sent a private message to the Concorde, warning them that something was unfolding beyond their control, not dangerous, yet, but alive, responsive, and deeply tied to motion and form. While some feared it, others wanted more, and one faction, led by a rigid-minded military strategist named Varek Sol, began developing a new project. Ships that copied Mira's movements but were controlled by artificial systems programmed to mimic form without feeling. Mira protested, warning that without real intent, the echo would not respond, or worse, might reject the false signals violently. But her words were ignored, and Varek launched the first trial of his ship, Pattern, Breaker, into a quiet system on the edge of anomaly space. The ship moved with perfect mimicry, spirals, elbow arcs, balance, rolls, but the storm did not react the same way it had with Mira, and then something terrifying happened. Space around the ship pulsed once, then twisted sharply, forming a temporary fold that snapped the vessel sideways with no warning, disorienting the crew and nearly tearing the structure apart before spitting it back out into regular space with systems fried and balance lost. Mira's warning had come too late. The echo of intent did not answer copies. It answered only truth. The assembly halted the artificial program, and finally, Mira was granted full permission to lead an official research mission, not based on engineering, but on movement and meaning. Her team included not only humans, but Seldari motion tacticians, Lanari float dancers, and even a few Stoker warriors who used tailspins in their cultural greetings. Together, they began the first attempt to understand the vault as a living system, one that responded to the galaxy not with sensors or commands, but through a kind of trust earned only by how one moved through the space around them. As they trained, tested, and moved in harmony, the old patterns inside the vault began to pulse again, and Mira knew the storm wasn't just a door, it was part of something greater, a system built to protect a message left behind, not in words, but in the flow of life itself. And just as the galaxy began to understand this, another echo formed, this one clearer, stronger, and shaped like a figure from the vault, standing in pure light, elbows bent, arms flowing in perfect form. It did not speak. It simply moved, and all who watched felt the meaning behind every motion. The galaxy had taken its first true step, not into war or power, but into understanding. And the echoes of intent would guide them from here. Mira stood before the glowing figure of light, its arms lifted, bent at the elbows, palms open, not in attack or defense, but in welcome. And everyone in the chamber, no matter their species, fell silent as they watched the being move with calm, perfect grace. A dance that was more than beautiful, more than skillful. It was full of meaning, and though no words were spoken, everyone could feel something stirring deep inside them, something old and strange and important, like the memory of a truth they had forgotten long ago. As the figure continued to move, its gestures began to change, forming loops and arcs that echoed the storm's original pattern, and Mira recognized them. These were the same movements she had made inside the anomaly, only now they were being shown with clarity and purpose, like the original version of a story she had once told from memory. She stepped forward slowly, matching her own arms to the figure's shape, and as her movements mirrored it perfectly, a ripple of energy passed through the room, soft but undeniable. And in that moment, something shifted, not just in the vault, but in space itself. Outside, scanners picked up a change in the anomaly's pulse. It was steady now, controlled, like it was no longer a wild storm, but a calm eye waiting for direction. The vault had accepted her once again, and it was now ready to share more. The figure paused, its glowing body fading slightly, and then one arm lifted in a strange new shape, the elbow bending sideways, fingers curling in a slow, careful twist. Mira frowned. This gesture was different from the others. It didn't match any martial move she had studied before, but it felt important. She tried to follow it, raising her own arm to copy the twist, and as she did, something sparked. A beam of light shot from the figure into the center of the chamber, forming a spinning globe of star maps and symbols none of the scientists could identify. It floated in mid-air, humming softly, and then began projecting lines of movement through different systems, all spiraling toward one central point. An unmarked star system far beyond the conquered's borders, in a region long thought to be empty. Mira stared at it, then looked back at the glowing figure, which had now stepped aside, as if inviting her to go. The Concord Assembly responded quickly, organizing an expedition with ships from multiple worlds, all prepared to follow Mira's lead. But Mira insisted that only those who had trained in the movement sequences should go, warning that the vault's messages were not meant for force or machines. They were for those who understood motion, balance, and intent. The Conquered agreed, and so a small fleet of strange new ships, each with curved hulls and motion-responsive controls, set out under her guidance. As they approached the unknown system, the space around them began to shift, not with chaos, but with pattern. Fields of gravity shaped like spirals and echoes of earlier vault gestures, as if the very stars were holding position in a dance. Mira's team moved together, guiding their ships with elbows, shoulders, and hands, not pushing through space, but flowing with it. And as they neared the center, they found another structure, a massive ring, hidden behind the star's glare, made of the same strange material as the original vault, but far larger. It was asleep, but not dead. Mira opened her ship's canopy and stepped onto a landing platform that formed under her feet as she approached, and then she raised her arms and repeated the gesture, the twist of the elbow, the curl of the fingers, and the structure responded. Light sparked along its edge, and the ring began to turn. Inside, a chamber opened and Mira entered alone, the door closing softly behind her. Inside, she found not just another vault, but a memory archive filled with figures made of light, performing endless patterns, battle moves, greetings, rituals, all from the lost builders of the vault, who had called themselves the Ilarin. Their message was simple. Long ago, they had discovered that motion could shape space, that meaning could ride on the curve of a limb or the twist of a spine, and they had built their ships, their homes, even their stars, to respond to the way beings moved through them. But when war came, others tried to force that motion through machines, stripping it of meaning, and the Ilarin vanished, leaving behind only doors that would only open to intent, not imitation. Mira sat down in the center of the chamber and watched the last Ilarin recording, a single elder stepping into a spiral field, raising their arm, and making the same strange elbow twist that Mira had made earlier. It wasn't just a move, it was a message. We will return when someone understands. Mira stood up, repeated the gesture once more, and this time a soft sound filled the chamber, the first sound the vault had ever made. It was music, not loud, not complex, but real, and the lights changed as the ring structure began to open, more fully, revealing a hidden archive of stabilized anomaly drives, space-folding blueprints, and healing technologies the Concord could have never imagined. But more important than the tools was the meaning. The Vault had accepted not just Mira, but humanity's way of moving through the universe. With heart, with feeling, with awkward yet beautiful intent. Word of what Mira had done spread fast. Across the galaxy, species began to study not just motion, but meaning, realizing that every step, every gesture could carry truth or emptiness, and that the galaxy itself might be listening. Some resisted, saying war was still needed, but others began to build new ships, not for battle, but for balance. In the Concord Hall, Mira stood before the leaders of 50 worlds and showed them the final gesture the Vault had given her. The elbow bend, the twist, the soft opening of the hand, and as she did, a ripple passed through the hall, and everyone felt it, not in their minds, but in their bodies, a feeling of clarity, of direction, as if the stars themselves had leaned in. To listen, it was not just a gesture, it was a message that changed everything. The chamber was quiet as Mira Holt stepped into the center once more, where the light of the ancient ring bathed her in soft, shifting colors that pulsed like breath. And across the room, the holographic archive of the Ilarin's final gesture still hovered in the air, the same twist of the elbow, the gentle turn of the wrist, the open hand of peace. And although it looked simple, Mira had come to understand that this motion was not just a greeting, not just a symbol, but a signal, a kind of key that could reach farther than anyone imagined, and now the time had come to test its reach. The Concord had watched her closely since the ring opened, and now, with ships from over 70 allied worlds gathered around the Vault in orbit, they waited to see if the message Mira had unlocked would be accepted beyond this system, beyond this ancient space, and out into the stars where the unknown still waited in silence. Mira closed her eyes, took a breath and moved slowly, her arms sweeping in deliberate circles, her elbow rising, twisting, bending in the same motion she had practiced 1,000 times. But now she moved not with training, but with feeling, with the full weight of understanding she had gathered since the day the storm first broke open. And as she completed the final motion, space itself responded, not violently, not with noise, but with a soft ripple that spread from the ring like a wave across the sky. At first, nothing seemed to change, but the ships nearby detected a shift in background radiation, a pattern, faint but steady, repeating in timed pulses like a code written not in numbers but in rhythm, and Mira smiled because she could feel it too, deep in her bones, like the universe was whispering back the same gesture, the same meaning. The Ilarin had not just left their vault to be opened, they had left it to be answered. Across the stars, anomaly fields began to show signs of motion, forming soft spirals and loops that had not been seen before, and ancient systems long thought to be lifeless suddenly sparked with brief energy bursts that matched the same patterns Mira had traced with her body. Word of this spread quickly, and other movement-trained explorers began to travel to these places not with weapons, but with patience and form. And in some of these locations, hidden doors began to open, showing more signs that the Ilarin's message had been waiting, not just for technology, but for understanding. On one quiet planet orbiting a red dwarf, a Stoker diplomat stepped into an old crater and repeated the elbow gesture as Mira had shown. And the ground lit up with soft lines, forming the first known Ilarin star map beyond the vault, pointing toward a cluster never charted before. On a drifting station deep in neutral space, a Lanari explorer floated into a silent chamber and moved her body in slow arcs, echoing the dance Mira had taught, and soft music played from unseen speakers. As the station awakened for the first time in centuries, back on Mira's ship, the Momentum's edge, new data flowed from every corner of the galaxy, reports of gentle activations, of symbols glowing where none had glowed before, of machines that responded not to touchscreens or control sticks, but to balance, breath, and intention. It was a new kind of map, not of places but of meaning, where the stars did not just show distance, but depth. Mira worked without rest, guiding new teams, sharing new forms, each gesture a message of peace, of listening, and more, the stars responded, not with great power, but with presence, as if waking up to something familiar. But not everyone welcomed this. In the darker corners of space, groups who relied on fear and force saw the rising shift as a threat, and some tried to copy Mira's movements through machines again, hoping to control the vaults. But once more, the echoes rejected them. One group even attempted to send drones into a new site with synthetic arms, mimicking the elbow twist. But the vault's energy folded inward and disappeared, taking the drones with it. These groups began to fear the idea that intent mattered more than control, and one faction launched a stealth mission to capture Mira herself, hoping to force her to unlock more vaults for them. But she had grown wiser, and when they came for her near the edge of anomaly space, she stood alone on her platform and moved, not to attack, but to show a truth. Her gestures flowed in full form, and the storm responded, forming a protective field that bent their weapons aside and gently pushed the ships away, not broken, just moved. It was enough to show the galaxy that what Mira had found could not be stolen, only shared. After that, something greater happened. One morning, as Mira walked the ring's inner chamber, the air thick with quiet light, the figure of the Ilarin returned, but this time it was not just one being, it was many, faint shapes made of light and memory, all moving in perfect unison. They circled her, raised their arms, and performed the same gesture she had shared with the galaxy, the twist, the elbow bend, the open hand. Then they paused, and for the first time they spoke, not in sound, but in shared thought. You listened. Mira could barely hold back her tears. You remembered. And then, as she watched, the light figures opened their arms wide, and the chamber shifted, revealing a map of all Ilarin vaults. Hundreds scattered across the stars, each waiting, each still closed. But beside each one now, a tiny light flickered. Not strong, but there, like stars just waking up. The message had gone through. The stars had heard it, and now the real journey could begin, not to take, not to conquer, but to understand. Mira knew this was not the end of her story, but the beginning of everyone's. Because across the galaxy, people had begun to move with meaning, to walk with purpose, to speak without words through gestures that echoed truth. The vaults would open, the storms would calm, and the stars, silent for so long, would finally answer the question they had been waiting to hear. Not who are you, but how do you move, and in every motion the answer would live, echoing forever through the stars.